Buenos días, lo siento porque mi español es terrible. Necesito presentar en inglés. Thanks you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I want to start by just explaining a bit about who we are at Axios. We are very new still. We were launched less than 2 years ago, January 2017. Our founders were journalists from the Washington Post who left to form Politico, which is another digital media outlet, and they left more recently, obviously, to form Axios. So that's how we were born. Our core areas of coverage are politics, technology, and business. Off of that, we have international affairs, which is my area of coverage, media, energy, healthcare, and for all of those, about a dozen or so areas of coverage, we have an email newsletter attached that's led by the person that leads that department. They send it. It comes personally from their email address, either daily, mine is twice a week. And so it's a roundup of their reporting and the big news in their area of coverage. That's one of the primary ways that people interact with our journalism. The other is through our website, axios.com. And just to give you a sense of the scale, we now have 3 offices, Washington, New York, San Francisco, and we have about 140 total staff, but journalists, it's closer to 50 journalists. So that's the basics of who we are. Now just a bit about why we exist. So this is kind of the media environment that we were entering into. So we noticed that if somebody lands on your article, odds are they won't actually read all the way to the bottom. And if they land on that article, they probably won't click anything else on the page. It'll just be the one article, and then they'll leave. And the attention spans have gotten so short that even if somebody is so inspired by something you post on Facebook or Twitter that they decide to share it, they actually probably aren't even going to click the link and read the story. And so we were kind of facing this challenge as a new media company and thinking about how we could build something that sort of matched more with what users were looking for and consuming, rather than starting from sort of the basis of print publication, which many of us came out of. I worked for a newspaper prior to joining Axios. So this is kind of our theory of the case, is that there's a gap in between the reader and the producer of news. One issue is that there's more news content than ever before. There's been an explosion in the US of new media companies. We're not the only media company starting, but also as newspapers, TV stations go digital, there's a flood of information coming at people. There's been big issues all over the world, and especially in the US currently, of trustworthiness in news. And it's getting more and more difficult to filter out quality information from information that is more suspect. So that was one of our main ideas, was to build kind of a no-nonsense, hard news platform that was built for the digital age. So we're mobile first. Most of our readership comes on cell phones. So we were built with that in mind, and then desktop was kind of secondary for us. And then the sort of main facet that makes us different is this smart brevity. That's our tagline. It's kind of what sums up what we're trying to do. So we don't want to dumb down coverage, but we do try and express as much information as possible as quickly as possible to fit into people's schedules. And so if you see our articles, I'll show you an example later, you'll get the news, you get what's new right away in the article, and then you'll get a bit of context, and if you decide to go further, you can. Otherwise, you just scroll through and you get to the next article. So people have compared it to smart Twitter. We don't really view it that way. We kind of view it as taking what you might see in the New York Times or somewhere else and streamlining it into our format. So that's our approach. Now here's an example of what it looks like. So this is our page on a cell phone. This is what our articles look like. We try and have a compelling visual headline, and there is the start of the article. Hopefully, if this works correctly, it should take you through. Yes, so as you scroll on our page, this will be one story. If you're interested in that story, you click keep reading and keep going. Otherwise, it'll take you into the next story. And so pretty quickly you can scroll through politics coverage, business coverage. We try and curate the biggest stories across the areas that we cover into one stream that you can scroll through as the consumer. All of the stories you're seeing here have this keep reading option, but actually we have lots of stories that fit into one cell phone screen. An example is if Trump tweets something. He's been tweeting a lot about the president of France this week. So if he tweets, French tariffs are too high on wine, we'll take that, we'll say, here's what Trump tweeted, here's a bit of context. We probably think people don't want to know the intricacies of wine tariffs between the US and France, but if they do, we'll give them an option at the bottom to go read it somewhere else, because we're probably not going to write that story, but maybe Vox or the Washington Post have a version of that story that we can send people to. So we try and mix our original reporting that can be as long as, if we have an inside the White House report, it might be 600 words. That's a long story for us. But otherwise, if it's something that's reported elsewhere that we just think people should be aware of, it's probably going to be closer to 150 words. So that's how our stories work. We also try and let the visuals do a lot of the work. So again, we want to express as much information as possible, as efficiently as possible. We have a lot of data involved in our coverage. These are just 3 examples of data visuals that really did a lot of the work for the stories, and there wasn't that much text built around. People sometimes ask about how advertising fits into that equation. We have only native advertising, so we don't have programmatic ads. We also are not a massive scale company, so we're not going to compete with BuzzFeed for the number of clicks that will lead a big windfall of advertising revenue. So what we have are ads targeted for our consumers that fit into either the stream or the newsletter. You scroll past the ad. My newsletter is sponsored at the moment by Johnson & Johnson, I think. So our newsletters all have sponsorship. It's integrated into the product, and those ads are built in-house in collaboration with the companies involved. So now I just want to break down, we've been doing this for 2 years, some of the stuff that has worked really well, some of the stuff that we're still trying, and some stuff that has not worked that well so far. So one thing that is very distinctive for us, and it's helped us build our brand, are scoops and exclusives, stories that you can only read on Axios. And so we have very dialed-in reporters covering the White House, covering Wall Street, covering Silicon Valley. And that has helped us get our name out there, having original reporting. That's a big part of it. There was a New York Times article about us recently that called us a scoop factory. We're trying to be more than that, but that's kind of our reputation a bit, that we have these short bits of information that are new that we can get out there first. Social media is a big part of our push. We were starting from 0 followers and entering into this environment, so we had to be strategic about not only building a following, but building an engaged following that will go the extra mile and click our story. So we have a smart social media team that's very strategic about building audience that way. Social is a pretty big chunk of our traffic. Far more so than search, which is actually difficult in our format. Search rewards longer stories, and so our stories are very short, so that can be a difficulty. So social is a big part of it. And email, we've found that email works well. Sometimes people think it sounds outdated, kind of old-fashioned, but everybody is using email, so we're meeting people where they are. We send alerts through email. We send, obviously, the newsletters through email. Another thing is just keeping the smart part of smart brevity. We've been pretty cautious about not doing, there's so much low-hanging fruit, especially when it comes to Trump right now. Trump does something outrageous every single day, and we'll probably note that he's done it, but we don't want that to be, if you come to Axios, we don't want to just be what Trump tweeted today. We're trying to keep it smart, gear things towards a slightly more sophisticated audience, and not always going for the sugar high of the latest Trump story. And then the last thing is building, a very core readership. We want this to become a habit of people. So we have, I think, 250,000 people that subscribe to at least 3 newsletters. That's ideal for us. We want people to be getting their politics news from us, but we also want them to get their business news. We have a roundup that crosses multiple verticals. We want to be kind of one-stop shopping for people for their news needs, that applies to the website as well. So building people that if they want to know what's going on in the news today, they go to Axios.com and they scroll. So that is central to what we're doing. That's, if we're going to be successful, that's a big part of what it will be, is not just being the thing where you saw us on Twitter and you clicked once and you don't come back. We need to build people who are loyal to what we're doing. And also, again, I mentioned our visuals are a big part of our coverage. We want to be visually compelling. Sometimes I think people are more likely to open my newsletter in their inbox because they think they'll see something beautiful inside rather than the amazing insights that I have in reporting. And so this is kind of another big part of our image of kind of we want to be sleek. We want to be, something that you enjoy scrolling through. A couple of things that haven't worked so far. We seem to sometimes have a couple of different readerships. We have people who think we're just a newsletter company, especially people in Washington where I'm working. I talk to people in government and they think, oh, Axios, you guys send that morning newsletter. So they figure we're 10 people sitting there putting out one newsletter, and they don't realize that we have this whole website full of independent information. In reverse, we have lots of people who get to us through Facebook, through Twitter, who read us online, and we can't get them to go the extra mile to subscribe to newsletters, which is really kind of our bread and butter. And so, combining those two readerships, bringing them together, it gets even more complicated when you add technology, business, politics. We have kind of siloed readerships almost who read us for one thing. And I mentioned we want to be a one-stop shopping area for people. So figuring out how to combine those areas of readership is important. Another thing that people ask us about, our CEO, when we were launched, said we were going to have really high-end subscriptions. So most of it would be free, but then we would have really specialized coverage that people would pay, I think he said $10,000 for, which is, gets brought up a lot. People always ask me, where are the $10,000 subscriptions? We're still all advertising-based. We're working on how a subscription model fits into what we're doing, but we don't currently have those $10,000 subscriptions or even $10 subscriptions. And then another thing, I mentioned this before, one of the big difficulties of we launched the same day Trump came into office. We don't just want to do Trump coverage. We're covering artificial intelligence, we're covering the rise of China and all these big stories. It's very difficult in the current media climate not to just obsess about Trump. We kind of think, we're hoping to outlast Trump as a news organization, so we can't just be based around Trump. I think you're seeing this in a lot of US media. If you watch CNN in the US now, it's really just partisan fighting over Trump. That's what so much of our media is. It's easy to get into that, and it's easy to get some quick traffic off of it. That is one thing that we've had to pull ourselves back sometimes. If you look at our homepage and everything on there is Trump, one of our editors will say, come on, can we get something else in there? So that's another difficulty. A few things we're trying. We're on TV right now. We have an HBO miniseries. Tune in tomorrow night for episode 3 of 4. So that is something we never envisioned doing. TV was not part of the plan for us, and it's an experiment. It's difficult, but it's been rewarding for the people who've been involved. That's, I don't think, what we'll be known for going forward. We're not going to become a TV outlet, but it's an area we're exploring. Video is another. We have a great video team who produces really smart, sharp video, but integrating that into our overall coverage in a way that makes sense. It makes sense to have people take 2 weeks to make a great video, but where do you see the dividend? How does it fit into everything on the other side? That is something we're still experimenting with. Podcasts. We have a podcast right now. I feel like everybody, at least in Washington, has 10 podcasts themselves, so it's so oversaturated right now. Podcasts are really hot. It's difficult to stand out from the crowd, so we have one podcast we're trying to, that's kind of a test case for us to see if we can make podcasting work. The last couple of things, an app. We still don't have an app. Our website was built to function like an app, so you scroll through. So our developers said we don't need an app, but our readers said you need an app. So we're developing an app that will be out in the near future, and that kind of dovetails with my next point, which is we'd like to tailor the experience as you scroll through to the readers. Right now, if I go to the homepage, if Martine goes to the homepage, we'll see the same top stories. We would like to make it a more personalized experience so that if I'm a Wall Street executive, I probably care about the Trump stories today, but I also care about mergers and acquisitions. I care about the business news that might be hiding in our business substream and not in our main page. We'd like to pull that out and make it as an experience that works best for that person. That's difficult to do, but it's something we're working on as well. And then the last thing we're trying, which I've talked a lot about, smart brevity, we also are experimenting with how you do in-depth reporting, but still stay true to our format. So every week, we're now putting out one, we call them deep dives, one topic. We hit it from 8 or 10 angles with our experts. This week it's drug pricing, why prescription drugs are so expensive, and we have our experts break down 8 or 10 aspects of that situation in something that you scroll through. So it is a unified package, but it goes a little bit deeper than our other offerings. So that's all I've got, and so I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So I'm sorry, I'm going to do this in English also. So I'm sorry for my English also. But a couple of questions I would like to ask you is, one of the things that surprised me when I was working there with you is that you seem to have a very clear idea of who you're targeting, who's your audience. Because when I was starting to write, coming from a newspaper where you used to write stuff thinking about that should be read by your grandmother and by the president, but you said no, this is useless. The people that read us, they already know this. Who are the people that read you?
Our CEO says, I'm sure you've heard him say this, that we think there are about 20% of people who are consuming news who will be interested in the big topics that we're writing about. So we're not going for something, as I said, we're not really going for scale. We're not trying to become the biggest media company. We're sort of targeting a smart consumer of news who, you don't have to, when you write a story about the Secretary of State, for example, I don't explain who he is, how he got the job. We kind of assume that our readers are at a certain point with the story that we can kind of jump in midstream and explain what happened today. And that's what helps with our efficiency, because if you have to give all the backstory, it's very difficult to do that in 150 words, right? So that's part of it. I think one of the difficulties is, so my newsletter, which is a world news roundup, it was born out of our sort of flagship newsletter, which is called Axios AM, which has by far our biggest distribution. So mine was sort of a world news spin-off of that. So I thought my readers were U.S. politics readers, really. They were people who their main thing they're worried about today is U.S. politics, but they want to know about the world too. The question is, as you get a more sophisticated readership, I get emails sometimes from people in the State Department, from the Pentagon, then you start to think, oh, should I be gearing this toward a really high-end readers? But then, you lose readers doing it that way. So it is a balance. It's a balance. But I think, the main point is that we think there is a pretty big group, and we're in a big market, right? The U.S. and even just Washington is a relatively big market. So we can target a slightly more, somebody who's read into the story a little bit more, slightly more sophisticated consumer.
Another interesting thing was the Axiosisms. Can you explain what are the Axiosisms?
Yeah, so the stories I showed were slightly outdated because they didn't have the format that we've now mandated for every story, basically, which is the very beginning is the news, and the second paragraph it will be led with bolded words. So it'll either be why it matters, the big picture, between the lines, something like that. It keys the reader in to the significance of the story. So, I wrote yesterday, the last story I wrote was about Brexit, and it was members of Theresa May's cabinet have resigned today over Brexit. The second paragraph would be why it matters. Basically, if Theresa May is knocked off or if she can't get this deal through Parliament, nobody knows what happens next. This could be a big... And so that kind of focuses in the journalist as well, because in my last job, I might write 3 paragraphs of beautiful prose setting the stage for the story, but actually people want to know what happened, they want to know why it matters, and so those keywords are a big part of what we do.
What's your relation with Facebook? Because you have a lot of coverage about media and tech companies. do you have a relation? I mean, I've seen Facebook sponsors some of your newsletters, for example.
Facebook used to sponsor my newsletter, and I got emails from people saying, Facebook is doing horrible things. How do you let them sponsor you? That's a different conversation about, I mean, we basically don't only take sponsorship from Amnesty International and great groups that are doing great work. No, our relationship with Facebook, our tech reporters, I think, have a fairly adversarial relationship with covering Facebook. Facebook's a difficult company to cover. They're pretty insular. I think we had an interview with Sheryl Sandberg that Mike did. So there is I guess our reporters are in that orbit of Facebook, but as a publisher, Facebook has been pretty bad for the news industry over the last year, I think. A lot of news startups that were based on Facebook traffic have more or less collapsed because their system has changed, the whole environment around Facebook has dried up. So as a publisher, fortunately we weren't very reliant on Facebook as to drive traffic for us. From the publisher side, I think we feel like everybody else does, that Facebook is eating up all the advertising revenue and they're not giving us the kind of traffic they used to. As a journalist outfit, yeah, we cover Facebook aggressively. It's one of the big stories of the day. I don't think we have a cushy relationship with Facebook where they give us access and we are soft on them. I don't think it works that way. But yeah, that's it.
Just as a close, if there's no more questions, could you give us, for the people that don't know them, a little bit of a profile of who Jim and Mike are? Because I never heard of them before going to the US, and particularly Jim struck me like the person that knows more about media and what's going on and his vision. It's impressive. If you could give us a little bit of a profile of both of them.
Sure. So they were both former White House reporters. They were both working at the Washington Post when the digital news phenomenon hit. And basically Jim in particular was really outspoken about the idea that everything is moving online. The Washington Post then was publishing a newspaper and had a separate website, and they weren't running the newspaper stories online. It was all separate. It was two different newsrooms. They weren't putting their best information online. It was just kind of, and so they saw an opening. So that's when they left and founded Politico, which was a digital-first media outlet. And so Jim at that point was a reporter, but now he's become this kind of media entrepreneur character. And Mike, our other founder, still covers politics for us. But there were two White House reporters who basically were early on the trend of news moving online and jumped on it. And now, hopefully, the brevity thing is the next frontier, and so they've started that. But they've been in Washington a long time. We sometimes get accused of being a Washington insider publication because we're founded by two White House, real Washington people. So that's part of the reputation that we try and push off.
The swamp?
The swamp, exactly. That we're part of the swamp of Washington. But hopefully that's not the case. Yeah, they're two interesting guys. And Jim in particular has lots of ideas about the media and what everybody's doing wrong, and he's sometimes too public about them, so we get in trouble. But yeah, that's it.